My name is Ari Hanavar, and I'm the founder of Rumi with a View, dedicated to building music and poetry bridges across war-torn and conflict-ridden borders. My novel, A Girl Called Rumi, was released on this autumn equinox, which also marks the anniversary of the Iran-Iraq War, and it's a war that began in 1980 and lasted 8 years and destroyed countless lives. In the beginning of my novel, the main character collides with a mysterious bird in the garage of her mother's California home, and she begins to live her experience as a 9-year-old in war-torn Iran. To me, this bird is that mythologized part of our being that contains so much beauty, so much richness, but also immeasurable pain. My own story began in Shiraz, Iran, the city of poets and wine. When I was 6, my life was turned upside down. Women of Iran lost their right to ride a bicycle or sing or jog. And this was as a result of the Islamic Revolution, and music and dancing, as we knew it, also became illegal. Within months, Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, and then we found ourselves in the midst of an actual war. And then there was the war on joy. There was the war on our coping mechanisms, because ordinary ways that we could express ourselves and cultivate joy were so restricted, and some of them were outright illegal. When I escaped at the age of 14 under extraordinary circumstances and without my parents, my life became all about learning English, assimilating, and not succumbing to homesickness and this incredible sense of depression and loneliness and isolation that I was feeling. I soon became so busy fitting in and finding myself a new community that I rid myself of any trace of otherness, anything that would exclude me. And at this point, my fraught past that contained both magic and pain became a vestigial organ, something that I had no use for. It wasn't until a decade later when I had this encounter with that ascending feeling that was like a mythical bird about to soar into the skies. And this was such an intense and encompassing experience that it shook me to the core and knocked me to the ground. It shattered me into pieces. The process of reckoning and recovery for me included picking up my broken life, pieces of my broken life, and making something brand new out of it, something that incorporated both the magic and the suffering, the mystical and the ordinary. But as transformative and necessary as this process was for me, I realized that it didn't have to be this intense for everyone. So about 5 years ago, as part of Musical Ambassadors of Peace, I began holding music and dance sessions for refugees from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran here in San Diego, where I live. My goal was to give them something that was denied to me as a child, music, and something that I longed for as a newcomer, and that was a sense of community. And of course, the other part was that music and dancing have played such an integral role in my own healing journey. So for these newcomers like me, the thought of home welled up this longing, this intense yearning for a place that was no longer there. We didn't have a person in our mix who hadn't lost someone to war or to violence. And there wasn't a person who didn't consider themselves fortunate for escaping. Yet, there were these shards of pain from a broken homeland, from a broken home, a broken life. So when we began to get in these drum and dance circles, the first notes of a familiar song seemed to open a portal to the glorious sanctuary deep inside of each of us, where all was beautiful and all was well. And it didn't have to be even a familiar song to us personally, because as Iraqis sang and danced to Iraqi love songs, all of us rejoiced, all of us joined in and laughed with them. When we played a popular Syrian pop song, we all screamed and clapped and shimmied with our Syrian friends. And when we drummed with Afghan refugees and drummed to their ballads, we felt like we dissolved into the beat itself. That was when I began noticing that the capacity for joy may also increase the capacity for suffering and dealing with trauma and challenges. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote this article called "When Savoring a Pleasant Moment is a Radical Act." And it's based on my own observations as a child of war and how savoring joy helped, and also based on these music sessions. And for this, I interviewed a couple of renowned trauma experts and neuropsychologists. And it turns out that science backs this up. Increasing our capacity for joy makes it so we're not so overwhelmed by emotions. What happens to us is sometimes that we experience trauma in such a way that it stretches us beyond our capacity to deal with it. So we snap because we become so overwhelmed with sensations and emotions. But the problem isn't with the sensations and emotions, but it is that our capacity to hold those sensations and emotions has maxed out. What happens when we cultivate joy is that we gain the ability to feel the overwhelm without becoming overwhelmed ourselves. So savoring a good cup of coffee, making art, writing, being in nature, and of course music and dancing are all incredibly helpful. And if we're really lucky, as we increase our capacity, maybe that mythologized part of our being then has room to emerge and hold us and dance with us and make our lives richer and more glorious rather than knock us to the ground. For me, throughout the years, dancing itself has become a serenity prayer. As we say in Iran, a zikr. It invites me to pivot and flow with what I cannot control. It reminds me to summon every part of my being to what I must change, not leaving anything small or trivial behind. And it points me to the silence and the stillness from which movements arise and music emanates. This is one of the reasons that I've been holding dance sessions for asylum seekers who are stuck in Mexico, and I'm about to start sessions with new Afghan refugees. We dance to cumbia, bachata, and salsa through Zoom with my Central American friends who are stuck in Mexico, me in my living room and they in a crowded shelter in Tijuana. When I talk to them, these refugees tell me that they need joy and hope to survive. And my heart breaks every time I talk to them because they've left all that was precious to them behind, their home, their friends, their family, their sense of belonging. And then they arrive at the border and they have to live in these precarious situations. And they have already been through so much traveling on this several-month journey that was filled with difficulties, but they have no illusions that they'll face unbelievable challenges and uncertainties in their asylum process either. Many of them will be deported back to the place where they escaped from. But for one precious moment, they get to dance and sing with their babies.